first of all, I don't think there's any physics or biology that prevents you from living a long time.
So you're telling me that there's a chance that I can look 29 until I'm 68 years old?
Well, until you're 100 years old. Yeah.
That's not a bad deal, ladies and
Or
gentlemen. I might
beyond.
take
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. We don't know when it will be, but I think it's already happening. The revolution is already happening. And so you can now make things that were in little pieces into long pieces and then put that into a modern species like an elephant or a wolf. That process has now been proven to work where you can restore a few genes to their ancestral state or to a particular extinct state, and that could benefit the modern species by giving them the diversity that they've lost.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. Today, we are interviewing the incredible Dr. George Church. He is one of the founders of Colossal Biosciences and is most well known for his work in the Human Genome Project. Mr. Church, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So, I want to start the show off actually with something a little bit different. It's online. Please tell us a little bit about the legendary mugshot photo of yourself that there is out there.
Mugshot. Oh, this is the Personal Genome Project mugshot. It took me a second to figure out what you meant. The short version is we established this project where people were going to provide their genome sequence and medical records and identifiable features like facial information, just to show that it could be done and to provide a resource where people could look at the whole person rather than some de-identified shreds of phenotype and genotype. Anyway, so for the first meeting, first kind of public meeting where the first 10 people were sequenced, we also did some measurements on them, and one of them is we wanted to have across the forehead a little measurement tape, and down beneath each person we had their PGP number. So there were PGP 1 through 10. Yeah,
That's
so
super
it
interesting.
looked a bit like mugshots, and we kind of enhanced that a little bit to make them look exactly like mugshots.
See, so when I was doing some research, it's like I've known about you for a very long time, and I have a lot of questions to ask you about your work. But I was looking, I'm like, what the fuck is this? Just like it's like did you do something, get onto like someone's property doing research and got arrested? So I'm glad it was more of a scientific thing and not so much a breaking the law thing.
Yeah.
So I really want to know, as a child, I heard about your work in the Human Genome Project. What was starting that project like? What led you up to all the information you needed to that point? What was it like assembling a team, and how did you get started in the process?
Yeah, so I was involved in the very, very first meeting, which was in 1984. It was, but from the Department of Energy of all places, and they were tasked by Congress to figure out what kind of mutations could be caused by atomic radiation, either from bombs or from nuclear reactors. They were responsible for the historic events in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we concluded that we couldn't actually estimate mutation rates in a genome where we had no example of a genome. And so we proposed that first we should do a sequence of genome, determine the sequence of 3 billion base pairs. And that went back to DOE, and DOE headquarters really loved it, and they immediately started funding it. And so I got one of the first Genome Project grants as a consequence. And have been working with them ever since. I still have DOE funding, so it's 1987 to the present. It was all technology oriented at the beginning. That first conversation in 1984, the Department of Energy itself was a very technology oriented place. They had these all kinds of robots to handle hazardous materials. They had and my group developed technology. When the NIH got involved, though, it became much more of a kind of turn the crank, don't change anything if it's working, and which disappointed me. So I was kind of I went from being a kind of a founder to being a refusenik, And so I would work in my skunk works on developing a better way because I didn't like the idea of it costing $3 billion to do kind of half of what would be a clinical genome in the future. So by the time the Genome Project was done, we got the price down into the sub $1,000 range, and that allowed us to redo the Genome Project over and over again, and at higher quality.
So that's really interesting that it's, of all things, the Department of Energy
Yeah.
was the one behind it. No, it wasn't. There wasn't any interest from any sort of scientific research groups or medical groups about, hey, maybe we could uncover the whole human genome and then use that project to work along with other species. It was entirely an idea based off of nuclear radiation and how that would affect people.
Yeah, I mean, the DOE was a scientific group. It just wasn't typically thought of as a medical group. The medical group was the NIH, and they didn't really get involved until three years later.
Hmm. And what would you say was the most shocking thing during your Human Genome Project research, I guess? What was something that you thought was very surprising or unlikely to find and you ended up finding it?
Well, I think there were a lot of people that were involved in the first genome made a fuss about exactly how many genes there were. It went up to 150,000, and it came back down to 20,000. But I don't think that was really surprising, or the number of repeated sequences, or this and that. I think what really was surprising was that it was the technological plummeting in price. I mean, almost no technology has come down from 3 billion for a poor quality to $250 for a high quality genome in basically a little over a decade. I mean, it even made the amazing progress in electronics look slow and pokey. So that wasn't really a scientific fact. That was more of an engineering, observation and achievement. Yeah, I mean, I think it was even there. We found a lot of genetic diseases, maybe 4,000 or so, that were relatively easily caught with genetic counseling. So this is something that could save trillions of dollars just by doing carrier screening. Again, that has kind of slightly more of an applied flavor to it than pure science.
And how did you get the cost down from, what was that, 3 billion to $250?
Yeah, so it was. I think there was a big rush to get it done, and quite frankly, some people are incentivized by having more money rather than less. In other words, the more money that passes through your hands, the more you can take and put in your pocket, right, or put into other scientific projects in
Hmm.
this case. So there wasn't that much motivation to lower the price. Just as in industry, there's not always a motivation to lower the price to the public. They might lower the costs and build up a bigger profit margin. Um, but the main change was going from something that was a very slow um, migration of DNA and electric field to very fast, which is just taking pictures. It was like, it's like essentially taking movies as you go across a field of little dots, and measuring the color of those dots under a microscope. That was incredibly fast, and it scaled very well, kind of like the same way the semiconductors scale. You can make the dots smaller, put them closer together, and 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 so and the basic underlying concept was what we call multiplexing, or and in this case, it involved cycles of probing uh, a solid surface and imaging and probing and imaging over and over, and that turned out to be the winning combination. A second way, just very briefly and different, was nanopore sequencing. So this is a very non-obvious combination of sort of something from neurobiology where you can detect single molecules in a membrane, plus the need for sequencing, getting really long reads, long stretches of A, C's, T's, and G's. So those two things, the kind of the fluorescent microscopy or the nanopore, they both were capable of doing much faster much longer, much higher quality ultimately.
And that's what allowed you to be able to uncover everything in the human genome.
Yeah, and in multiple people. I mean, it was very important not to do one genome, which was the original project, one genome for $3 billion. It was to do from each person has two genomes, one from their mother and their father, and every person is different. So we needed a method where you could do millions, eventually billions of genomes to really get it. What affects how it affects your health care, what makes you you, and all that stuff.
And how many subjects? What was the sample size of individuals you used?
Well, so the original project was supposed to be diverse, but it ended up being basically one or two, maybe three people.
Mhm.
At this point, there are millions that it is, but it really should be billions, and it's not, and it has no, it's gone from costing billions of dollars to essentially not only being free, but you make money every genome that you sequence because you can avoid 3% of us die of completely avoidable, very, very serious so-called single gene genetic diseases.
What would you say is the most common genetic disease that causes mortality, at least in recent times?
Well, most common disease is aging. 90% of us are going to die from aging. I know that sounds silly.
aside aside
It's
from
very far
aging.
from it's it's very far from single gene. But the problem is the really serious single gene mutations that cause death, other than aging, are rare. And the things that are really common are, hemoglobinopathies, things that affect your hemoglobin are quite common, mainly because they've been selected for in the malaria belt, because having one of the two copies be broken makes you resistant to malaria. But even there, I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. We're not talking about second to aging. That is are multigenic diseases that like heart disease, diabetes, and so forth. Um, and those are common, but they also involve multiple genes.
hmm And this actually segues into what I wanted to ask you because I know you've done some research and wrote a little bit about this. Is just sort of the extending of human lifespan, eliminating sort of these diseases and maladies that occur over the span of people's lives. What do you think is a realistic approach that people could live a certain lifespan and extending it and keeping the body young and healthy for a much longer period of time?
So, first of all, I don't think there's any physics or biology that prevents you from living a long time. There's no fundamental law, but there still is. It's still a daunting task, and in particular, I think that we're all these kind of fundamental. This is very important medical knowledge. This is not. And therefore everything that involves medical treatment of people has to be approved by the Food and Drug Administration or equivalent agencies around the world. And I don't. When I come up with a new, when my group comes up with a new treatment, we don't go to the FDA saying this extends life. We say this is reversing or curing a particular very serious disease, and that they can wrap their head around. It's easy to evaluate. And it happens in a short period of time. So if you say I'm going to extend human life beyond normal, that might be, you know, several decades of waiting to see whether actually and doing it in thousands of people. But if you say you're reversing a serious disease, that could happen in weeks and with a relatively smaller cohort. So anyway, that's what we're doing at companies like Rejuvenate Bio, which is exploring gene therapies, which has a nice feature of being once and done. Is the gene therapy is essentially dosing you for life without having to remember to take your pills.
So, how does
Um,
gene therapy work? I've heard about it, but I'm not exactly sure how it works. Like, I'll give you my non-professional idea of how I thought it would work is that they would take your blood, look at your genetic, your DNA, everything, see what's wrong, and then they would be able to alter something in you by giving you some type of medication or injection. I'm sure that's completely wrong, but please tell me how the
No,
whole gene
no,
therapy process
that's actually
works.
close.
Oh,
So
surprise.
gene therapy is broken up, I guess, in two components. One is where you're dealing with rare diseases and you want to fix something that's broken in one person but is fine in everybody else. For aging, you got something that's broken in basically in every person, so it's a slightly different. You don't have to necessarily sequence the person that you're trying to cure. It's more of a one size fits all cure. Now you need to make sure that you've addressed all of the individual specific genetics first, but then everybody's equal, and then you have to have a generic, more generic solution. And it is true that there's a kind of a species. You can think of it as a species disease. Um, Rodents die in 1 or 2 years. Bowhead whales, which are also mammals, live 200 years. And so there's probably multiple things that are kind of been evolutionarily selected to have a particular lifespan window and health span. And so, but we know lots and lots about the physiology and the way that it plays out in each of these organisms, including extremely long-lived human beings and so forth. And that information can be used to inspire. Um, take you watch. There's certain genes that come down with age, the expression of it in the proteins of the body, and what you can say is, well, let's try boosting those up and see what happens. And in many cases, we know what happens, and we're going to boost it up in the form of a gene therapy by injecting literally one or two or three or more genes in a package that helps them go through the blood, find the right organs or all the organs, and deliver this boosting thing that's something that was this naturally very high in at birth and is lower and lower as you get older. So you boost it back up and you can get that benefit. So that's the basic strategy, and it's typically, as with all drugs, it's tested in animal models first, and then some of it turns into veterinary products. Like some people don't want their dogs to age, and so that goes beyond just testing the drug. It becomes a product, and then a very similar product goes into human clinical trials.
What do you think is a realistic approach and timetable for human longevity to extend to over 100 years? I mean, there's people that live to over 100 now, but a healthy, happy, athletic life, what do you think that's in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years? And what can people sort of expect from that type of research?
Right. Yeah, there's about 600,000 people who live over 100 now. Some of them are fairly, they're surprisingly active and healthy, which shows that, wouldn't it be nice if we all got at least that healthy? Um, but we want to, but I think it's even better if we are sort of the healthiness that you have at 50, 60, maybe even 70 years old, where you're really at the top of your game. You got you got all your marbles in place, and you've spent a lifetime getting educated and developing wisdom and maturity. So it seems like the last thing you'd want to do is unplug the supercomputer after you've done all the problem of building it and and educating it. So how long it would take? I think it takes about a decade, as little as 1 year, but as much as a decade to get something approved by the FDA. Fortunately, there's a lot of different things happening at once right now that are making their way. These are age-related disease reversal, cures for age-related diseases that are happening all at once. So wouldn't be surprised if 10 years from now we have a lot of solutions that will make us more useful as a side effect of curing a age-related disease, as probably an intentional side effect. I should note, and the FDA will approve those for one thing, but it actually works on a dozen different age-related symptoms and phenotypes. So that's a decade out. 2 decades, and of course, all the people that benefit from that will live another, maybe live another 5 years or so than they would have expected, and then that brings them into the next decade where medicine is improving, medical research is improving exponentially, assuming nobody cuts off our medical research funds, um, and so then we'll get probably 10, 20, 30 years of extra youthful life and a lot more reversal of age-related symptoms, not necessarily even diseases at that point. And then it just keeps going from there. So there won't be like a sharp point where we say that, people will continue to die and we may not, some people may not even notice it unless it's properly covered by podcasts like this.
Mhm.
But yeah, I think we're already in the midst of it. As Gibson once said, the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed.
So you're telling me that there's a chance that I can look 29 until I'm 68 years old?
Well, until you're 100 years old. Yeah.
That's not a bad deal, ladies and
Or
gentlemen. I might
beyond.
take
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. We don't know when it will be, but I think it's already happening. The revolution is already happening.
Tremendous. That's such cool news. That's so exciting to hear about. I mean, tried explaining this to somebody 30 years ago and they would be like, what is happening? The future is wild. But
Right.
speaking of things to do with aging and humans and genes, I've always been very passionate about like Pleistocene and Ice Age and all that stuff. But before we get to like extinct animals and stuff, recently we've been seeing more and more discoveries and things still regarding the Denisovans, Neanderthals, so on and so forth. And I wanted to talk about, I'm not sure how much you would know about what might have led to their disappearance if they just intermixed with us, because we all know humans are obviously admixed. Modern humans are admixed with Neanderthals and Denisovans to a degree, and higher and lower percentages depending on population. But why do we think they disappeared? And is there a possibility? I'm not saying it's ethical, but is there a possibility of being able to sort of bring them back to life? I understand that Colossal, which is a company you've founded or co-founded, I believe, correct?
Co-founded. Yeah.
Yep, co-founded,
With
has been
Lamb.
working to bring back extinct species. But I know I'm rambling, but I'm just curious because this is something that I've thought about. I saw a trailer for like a really shitty looking movie where they did this, and I don't think they actually released it. So I'm curious to ask you.
Well, I think it's extremely unlikely and undesirable in the sense that it involves it's like we were talking about a moment ago, how everything has to be FDA approved. It's hard. It's
Yeah, I can't
hard to
imagine.
anticipate the debugging of the process in humans, uh, and also the motivation is not exactly there, and that applies both to cloning humans. So there's not a universal ban across the world, but many states in the United States and other countries are opposed to cloning for most purposes. Uh, uh, and secondly, germline engineering of genetic changes in humans of any sort, even if it's to cure a disease, is banned. Um, so you would require both to do that in this case, and I just think it's generally considered too risky, um, and not have advantages. Now, when we get to animals, we can explain what the
Mhm.
advantages are and how it's lower risk.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Let's talk about Colossal. Big fan. Big
Yeah.
fan when I discovered, when I first heard about that company a couple of years ago, I was like, okay, this is very
Yeah.
interesting. We'll see what they'll be able to do, because a lot of scientific groups and communities around the world sort of try to cash checks that they can't, say things that they aren't able to do. And you guys have slowly and slowly been showing until, about a month ago, your largest project. I'll let you talk more
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, so the idea is to help both endangered species and extinct ones. So some people say, well, we shouldn't be doing extinct, we should be doing endangered. The fact is, we're doing both. So the red wolf was endangered, Asian elephant is endangered, and we want to give them, new lease on life, new territory. So at one point, the elephants and their relatives covered almost the entire planet. I think the exception was Antarctica and maybe Australia. Um, so they were everywhere, and now they're only in regions where they're in high human population density and hence in conflict. Well, not that high in Africa, but anyway, if they could be restored to the Arctic, then we're helping the species, as well as the environment. So it's about restoring those, and in some cases it might, somewhat speculatively, help climate change by helping keep the permafrost frozen, which is extremely important. The temperature is only changed by, say, 3 degrees over, since industrial revolution, but but that 3 degrees is exactly what's required for keeping the permafrost frozen, and in the Arctic is more carbon than the rest of the world put together. It's and it could be released as some combination of carbon dioxide and methane. So unlike the ancient humans, there's a pretty strong argument for bringing back genetic diversity, either for restoring an environment to prevent global warming, or for just bringing back that diversity so that the endangered species don't become extinct.
Hmm.
So we can harvest diversity from all over the world and back in time, up to 2 million years.
So how does the process work? I understand it decently well, but for our listeners and anybody interested, how does that process work to sort of bring back an animal like an Asian elephant, turning it into, not turning it, but sort of recreating a woolly mammoth and reintroducing it back into that environment?
So first of all, it's easy to think about how you would bring back an ancient gene. Uh, to enrich an endangered species. So let's say you want to allow them to go a little bit further north, not necessarily all the way to minus 30 degrees in winter, but just a little bit further north. Then you can bring back, a little bit of hair or fat deposits or slightly smaller ears and so forth, and that can be inspired by things that you find in ancient DNA. So the process is you find the sample, which there a lot of them turning up because it's melting, and you take some DNA out of it and you sequence it. It's broken up. It's really damaged. It's a, a technical tour de force that we can get any reading out of it, but now we can get very high quality whole genome sequences out of. We've now got hundreds of ancient DNA samples read at high quality. But in little pieces, you put them together in the computer, and then the computer can direct that to be chemically synthesized, and so you can now make things that were in little pieces into long pieces, and then put that into a modern species like an elephant or a wolf, and that process has now been proven to work where you can restore uh, a few genes to their ancestral state or to a particular extinct state. And that could benefit the modern species by giving them the diversity that they've lost, because their herds have been carved up into pieces with pipelines and roads and things like that.
Hmm. And when do you think a project like that would be feasible or realistic in a timetable wise?
Well, we've already done that restoration of alleles, um, but it's kind of like version 0.5. It's not even version 1.0 yet. It's just but it shows that it can work, and some, both not only alleles, meaning DNA variation, has been restored, but also um, some of the traits. Now we don't know how many of the traits have been restored and get into what the definition of a species is, but it's in the case of the dire wolf, we restored 15 genes, and then 5 we put in. We For humane reasons, we weren't sure that the ancient we knew what the ancient version was, but we decided to put in a replacement for that was more likely to be compatible with a healthy animal. It could be that the ancient ones would be healthy, but it's also possible that it was more complicated. So we anyway, did a total of 20 changes, and probably the size and the color are clearly changed. So that was not just genetic; it was also, you can see the effects. We'll have to wait until they're fully grown to get the dimensions, all the bones and the teeth and so forth, and compare those. So, for example, the head, all the head measurements are larger relative to the legs. So they had, their legs were the same as modern wolves, but the heads were bigger. And so that ratio is something that we can get once they get their, the full body scan and everything.
Mm-hmm. And what were the genes that you said were ancient but were possibly for humane reasons dangerous or unsure of?
What it is there are uh, there are sometimes multiple ways to affect body size and coat color and things like that. An example in say humans is albinism. So that can make your skin lighter in color, and but it also has impact on the eyes. And so some of these genetic variants had effects on eyes and hearing, and other features that where you can see it in one species, it causes these defects, but in other species it seems to be abundant in the population. So there must be some other gene that's interacting with it to make it okay. And we just felt like our uh, knowledge of the genome, of that particular genome, hasn't advanced enough that we could make that call. So we just said we'll go for the phenotype without that's safer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, since this is version 0.5, I think that that speaks to our dedication to the animal welfare and to the ethics, um, rather than having the perfect genome be um, the driving force. We had some compromise where we're testing out methods. We're showing that we can get certain traits, and we still care about the animals.
Mm-hmm. And so essentially keeping all of the bad stuff or potentially bad stuff out, editing some things, putting them in, and then the phenotype. I'm a little bit confused by the phenotype. I'm sorry, like the expression why they're white. Can you just go a little bit more into
So
detail with that?
we published a paper about the same time we announced the edits, the 20 edits in the wolf genome. We published a paper where we did the first high quality sequence of the dire wolf, and when there are quite a few both ancient and modern genomes that have been done, and when you go through it, you try to say, oh, here's a change that is correlated to this phenotype, this trait, and it looks like from the dire wolf genome that it might have been white coat color, kind of like a polar bear. Um, um, it probably will take additional study to find that out, but one of the ways you find that out is by introducing the variants that you think would be affecting coat color and see what coat color comes out.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did that, and it came out white. But I think additional experiments are needed to confirm that. And the size also came out larger. It looks like they're going to be the three that are born will end up being some of the largest wolves in history.
Yeah, they definitely do look quite large and pretty stocky, especially, I grew up in California. The La Brea Tar Pits was right by my house, so I got to see all the direwolf fossils, all the Pleistocene fossils as a kid. So when I saw this news developing, it was like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing ever.
Yeah,
So
it
it's,
really has hit a nerve. That both the mammoth, which we haven't done yet, but just the idea that we might do it has,
Mhm.
plus what we have, like the little baby step we've taken with the wolves, is really hitting a nerve. Very positive, a lot of positive feedback
Mhm.
Especially inspiring. Hopefully, it's the next generation to consider science as a something they might be interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. So with Colossal, I know that there's a lot of de-extinction and saving animals that are currently endangered. There's another species that I actually wanted to talk to you about. A lot of people maybe know about it now, but it's the legendary sightings and so on in Australia, the thylacine.
Yes.
I've been a huge nerd my whole life. I always liked animals, so I've been reading since I was in middle school that we have the preserved specimens, we can abstract DNA, we're going to bring this animal back, we're going to have it put into a quoll or maybe a different marsupial that's closely related, bring them back. But realistically, where are we in that process right now?
So that, along with the mammoth, are more stretch goals. They're harder for different reasons. So the mammoth is a stretch goal because it has long gestation period, 22 months, and it has a large size. The thylacine is a stretch goal because the two close relatives are the numbat and the dunnart. The numbat is almost impossible to get, any access to it because it's extremely endangered, and the dunnart is about 1,000 times smaller. That's a big challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a huge range in, say, dog size. You maybe get 100-fold difference in from the smallest to the largest, but 1,000 for a marsupial would be hard to engineer. Not certainly not impossible, but it's just it'll stretch our technologies, which is what we're supposed to be doing. That's exactly what we're supposed to be doing is is having challenges like that. In that case, the argument for a lot of these species is they're keystone in some sense, that they help maintain the health of the overall ecosystem. The predators will help shoo away the prey, or select for the strong ones surviving, and so forth. The herbivores all maintain a particular ecosystem, like in the Arctic. It was mostly fertile grasslands, which has now been lost because of their absence of all the herbivores, not just the mammoths. So each of them has their reason for bringing back the extinct alleles. The thylacine, we know a great deal more about it because we have films of them behaving. We have eyewitnesses. It's a much more recent extinction, and most certainly human initiated
Yeah,
extinction.
there's definitely a big difference between something that went extinct naturally hundreds of thousands or millions of years ago versus something, that humans placed a bounty on. Do you think realistically it's possible that some are still out there, maybe not on mainland Australia, but in Papua New Guinea or somewhere in Tasmania?
Uh, there are active searches for them, including putting cameras in the field to so that there's no. Uh, I, th- I try to not say never and make pronouncements about whether they're there or not, but it's not for lack of trying that they
Hmm.
haven't found them. I uh, you know, we'll, we'll keep trying, but every direction, because they are of some you know si- significance to the people in those countries.
Hmm. And what would be another species that you would have an interest in working to bring back?
Well, there's a fairly long list that we have, as a community. Everybody has their own favorite endangered or extinct species. I'm quite fond, in terms of endangered species. I'm quite fond of whales, and I think that one big thing that we could do for the whales is stop feeding the krill. I mean, we don't really need krill for anything, but the whales absolutely need them, and we're sending, we're feeding it to dogs and cats, um, which I think is not a.
There's krill in dog and cat food.
There is, yeah. I mean, it's a source of it's a source of a lot of the carotene in the biosphere are the algae that the krill eat. And so, when you see like red salmon, that's the carotenes from these algae. But yeah, it's a real tragedy that we can't just leave the krill alone. We talk about how we're having whaling, rules on killing whales, well, you can also starve them. So so that, so those are endangered species. Extinct. There's really nothing close second to me than the mammoth in terms of justification and charisma and just size. It's just a lot of interesting things going for it. Um, but the other things are there's an extinct manatee relative that's about, I think it's 5 times larger
Yeah,
than
the
the
stellar sea cow.
exactly stellar sea cow, and that would be an interesting challenge. Um, yeah, dodo is also on the colossal list. It's not super high on my list, but it is, it is a meaningful icon, I guess,
Mhm.
of something that is that again was killed off by humans. A lot of these were killed off by
Yeah.
humans relatively recently.
Yeah, the stellar sea cow I think is the worst because like something like what, like 8 years or 10 years after it was discovered by European sailors, they just hunted it to extinction.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely. A
just
lot of these extinctions happen in a short period of time. So the passenger pigeon had billions of them, like maybe 5 billion, most of them in Northeast America, and 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 they flew fairly low. They would that you could kill 50 of them with one shotgun. Um,
people were hunting them for what? For sport, for food, or for
Well,
what?
it was considered low quality food. They would feed it to slaves um, and for sport. And then buffalo was a similar thing. Buffalo
Yeah.
was uh, it was and beaver. It was the fur. And in some case, it was depriving the natives of their relationship with
Mhm.
the bison. Um, and we went from 50 million bison down to about 500 in just a century. Um, so it's amazing how fast humans are at getting rid of species
Yeah.
when they put their mind to it. And wolves are another thing. They slaughtered all the wolves in Yellowstone. Again, bounties and just natural inclination of people to shoot uh,
Predators,
things
yeah.
that hurt their sheep and cows. Um, but then when they restored them, it was I think a net positive
Mhm.
for the park.
Yeah, I was reading something about, I think it was Scotland or somewhere in the UK, where they were reintroducing lynx for the first time in a
Yeah,
few hundred years. Yeah, it's wild to me that like there's a group of people living, like for example the UK, on these islands or wherever, insert humans anywhere, and the first thing that they're going to do is freak out about predators, extirpate them, and then
yeah,
there's a surplus of game, which
yeah,
just like destroys the environment and the water
yeah,
systems and everything, and then everything gets affected.
yeah, yeah. Beavers are particularly welcome to being rewilded and restored, and yeah, and they were among the victims as well.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely big reshapers of the environment. One thing that I wanted to talk to you about is, what do you think people can do now to sort of help preserve species? I know that you guys at Colossal are doing work right now for rehabilitation for things like the red wolf, but what are some things us as a public, and maybe things that we can do with the government or whatever country, state, city you live in, to try to educate people and sort of help this problem that we have?
Part of it is recognizing that infectious diseases are part of the problem. We introduced a number of infectious diseases to the New World, which hurt indigenous people. Uh, the black-footed ferret is getting the plague. Um, Elephants are getting a herpes virus infection that kills a huge fraction of the newborns.
Are they getting that from people?
No, no. Well, it's not certain exactly what role people play, but they certainly it's widespread among elephants. Um, I think that the point is that there are things like vaccines that can be introduced. There may be versions of vaccines that can be spread into the wild. It's hard enough to give vaccines to all the animals that are in zoos and parks, but the ones in the wild, it's hard to reach them. And so if you can, so there are ways that you can spread that. So that's something that the public can consider and think hard about how they, how they relate to that sort of solution. Also, habitat is the main thing. Absolutely, the top thing is what, do we really have to build, one more shopping mall? Is there in a particular location? Maybe we could locate it somewhere that would be less impactful on habitat, or pipelines and highways that crisscross and break up the land. What can we do to restore habitats? Where we've had a desert growing, you might want to shrink it back. What we can do about desalination to provide lots of irrigation. What we can do, to study these things. The cost of the salaries of ecologists is very tiny compared to the impact that some of these invasive species and environmental degradation, the cost of that to society is much higher than the cost of knowledge acquisition.
Absolutely. And actually, speaking of genetic species, not genetic, uh, introduced species, like for a good example, that would be Australia. And I've noticed they have a ton of invasive animals over there, like
Yes.
cane toads and
Yeah.
goats, camels,
Right.
etc. Cats specifically are a huge problem. Using genetics, I'm not sure about like the legalities or formalities or
Yeah.
anything like that. Is there a way that there could be something introduced into a species like rabbits or cats that are invasive to an island or Australia, for example, where they're decimating all the local species so
Yeah.
that they can't reproduce, or that all the new born
Yeah.
animals are born female or male, something like that?
Yes, these are called gene drives. Uh, but just an aside before we talk about gene drive, that there are invasive species that have been eliminated on quite a large number of islands. So, for example, in the Galapagos, they had a goat problem. The goats were uh, accidentally or stepping on eggs of rare tortoises. There are rodents on maybe 100 islands have been eliminated that were endangering rare bird species. Islands tend to be isolated and create new species, and then introduction of these mammals, for the most part, can be quite destructive. And so those are two examples on hundreds of islands. Um, the gene drive, but those don't always work. So they shot the goats from helicopters,
Yeah.
and they put rat poison to get rid of the rodents. But that doesn't work on other islands where the species you're trying to get rid of are too small to shoot, and the rat poison will affect lots of other species. So the gene drives is a way that you can do it genetically, where you can you can either use them to spread vaccines so they become resistant to some serious disease like Black Plague or Lyme disease or avian malaria and so forth, or it can be used to spread through the population of the invasive population, something that will um, uh, um, reduce their reproductive fitness.
What's
Again,
something like that
this is
that could be
something that the
done?
public has to talk about and decide which do they consider more important. Some kind of, uh, um, some kind of genetic way of population control, or just letting it happen.
Mhm. What, in your opinion, do you think is the best idea for a situation like that?
Uh, I think the gene drives should be studied. They should be tested on very isolated islands with the best biocontainment to see how they work. And they have been tested in laboratory strains of in for yeast and fruit flies. Um, but I think the time has come where they not only affect animal diseases and invasive species, but also human diseases like malaria and Lyme disease. Those could be the people that are afflicted with those could be the first beneficiaries. And I think uh, we kind of get sometimes don't give new technologies a fair shake I mean, I don't think we should just blindly adopt them, but I don't think we should be biased against a particular technology just because it has a particular property, just because it's, you don't say, oh, I'm not even going to consider this, you know, device because it happens to use, a particular mineral or particular, I mean, it's a more nuanced thing than that.
Yep, I would agree. I think that's a fair statement, and that would be a good approach to it. I mean, certainly seeing the effects of invasive species on islands, New Zealand, Australia, to be specific, or even the Galapagos, it's important. I think people often get attached to like a cuteness factor. Oh, you're gonna get rid of all these cats. I have a cat. I love cats. You can't do this. It's so cruel. Well, there's an entire ecological system that's been in place for hundreds of thousands or millions of years. Like, which one would you rather have? I think that's something that a lot of people have difficulty understanding. There's also that issue, I think, with
Also, you're not
rewilding.
necessarily killing them. You're just reducing their reproductive fitness.
Exactly. And I think that there's an issue with rewilding into certain areas, for example, like if there's going to be a natural migration. I know Denver had this recently pass for the wolf reintroduction into Colorado, and some scientists said wolves were going to already migrate back in from Montana and Wyoming, and then other people said we should vote to bring wolves back in. So it's interesting to see how different sectors of society really see things, and how scientists on one hand don't necessarily agree with scientists in another area. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep. And so, sort of to wind this down, one question that I wanted to talk about with you is, I know you're obviously, science is your life. You've been doing this for quite a while. What's something non science related you want people to get to know about you, something you're curious about, or something that sort of gets you to go on about your day that people might not know?
Many of the things I'm curious about are just sciences very far away from me, like dark matter and physics, something like that. But non-science things, yeah, I'm curious about the future. I mean, are we going to get smarter about our environment? Are we going to get smarter about being nice to one another? So I'm very curious about the future. Um, I'm curious what my granddaughters grow up and do. Very, just you get personally engaged, and you want to see how that goes. So I hope to see the distant future as well.
Yeah, of course. Hopefully, everything, people can pay attention and sort of learn from the mistakes of the past, and also look forward to all the amazing technological and scientific advancements that we've done. And a lot of that work is credited to you. So, George, this is personal for me, but I'm sure for many listeners as well. Thank you, for your work with Human Genome Project, now with Colossal. That's all work that we can commend. And, it's been great to talk to you about that.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah.